Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've been following along with our look into the philosophy of money, you'll know we've spent a good bit of time defining what it means to be a good financial steward.
Hmm.
But today, we are tackling, well, the concept that many people find the most challenging, maybe the most anxiety-inducing, and often really the most misunderstood.
Mm.
The whole principle of offering or giving.
Yeah, it's one of those words, isn't it? Gets so easily reduced, culturally to just writing a check or dropping some cash into a plate.
Exactly.
The word offering itself, it just immediately brings up images of like mandatory fees, or maybe even worse, some kind of transactional exchange where we feel, I don't know, forced to give something up.
And you expect something back.
Right, expecting a direct, maybe measurable return.
And that conditioning, that idea that offering is just some kind of financial tax, that's precisely what our sources today really aggressively push back against.
Yeah, they do.
So this deep dive, it's structured to move us completely away from that conditioned response. We're looking at sources that define giving not just as a transaction, but as a comprehensive, really foundational life principle.
It really is. It's kind of the capstone, isn't it? The final piece in really understanding the biblical view of money as presented in these texts.
Yeah, so where do we start?
Well, we absolutely have to start with the core statement provided by the sources, and it's like the complete opposite of a simple transaction. The sources define offering not merely as giving money, but as the dedication of one's entire self, your whole being.
The entire self.
The financial part, that's just the most visible, maybe the most measurable output of this deeper internal dedication.
Okay, so before we even get into the mechanics, how much, where it goes, or when we need to accept the foundation first.
Stick with it.
The prerequisite understanding that just has to be settled is this idea God owns all things. And we, humanity, we're simply called to be faithful and good stewards, good managers, really.
Faithful and good stewards, yeah. Of the wealth, the time, the talent, everything entrusted to us.
Right.
Exactly. And look, if you don't accept that fundamental worldview that everything is already owned by the divine, then giving immediately becomes, well, a negotiation.
Or a painful loss.
A painful loss, or maybe even an attempt to buy favor, right?
Mm.
But if you truly internalize that we are merely faithful managers of resources that were never really ours to begin with,
Okay.
then the entire framework of giving shifts. It's not about loss anymore. It becomes an acknowledgement.
An acknowledgement of God's ownership.
Precisely.
That distinction, giving as acknowledgement versus giving as a transactional loss, that feels absolutely essential for understanding everything else we're going to talk about today.
It is. It really is.
So let's unpack the core motivation then. Why this acknowledgement?
Right.
Okay, section 1 gets right into the theological basis. It starts with this guiding principle that, well, it immediately separates this whole concept from any economic theory the world operates under.
Yeah.
And that is, giving is more blessed than receiving. Now, why is this divine principle where, releasing resources brings greater reward than acquiring them? Why is that so fundamentally different from the scarcity model that drives, well, pretty much all global economies?
That's a great question. It's because the world's economy, fundamentally, is based on human effort,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Finite resources, the pursuit of security. It operates on this foundation of I earn, I own, I protect.
Makes sense.
But the divine principle, it flows from a totally different place. An abundance mindset,
Yeah.
rooted entirely in God's character, as described in these sources. We offer resources not because we have to, but because, and the sources really emphasize, that God first loved us.
Oh, okay.
This love, it's active, it's initiating, and it's utterly, completely unconditional.
So the whole system is motivated by grace then, not by debt.
Precisely. And the sources point immediately to the ultimate demonstration of this giving nature. John 3.16.
The famous verse.
Right? God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten son. Now think about that. This wasn't a gift given to people who'd earned it somehow, or to those who'd already cleaned up their lives or anything like that. God gave the most precious thing he had, even while humanity was still, locked in rebellion, still completely undeserving.
Wow.
This totally establishes the pattern. Giving comes before merit. Grace precedes response.
That concept, giving without merit, I think that's often where the modern mind really struggles. We're just so trained to believe, if you want something, you have to pay for it or work for it.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why the sources use such a Well, such a compelling analogy here.
Yeah.
They compare God's relationship with humanity to a parent's relationship with an infant.
Okay, an infant.
Yeah, this analogy, it just strips away all the conditionality, all the complexity we usually apply to human transactions.
Right. Because when a parent has a baby, they don't like assess the infant's performance before deciding whether to feed them or change their diaper.
Never. I mean, can you imagine? The parent gives that child complete love, provision, care without any immediate demands or conditions.
Yeah.
Think about the enormous financial burden, the time commitment of raising a child to adulthood. A parent doesn't sit down with their toddler, present a spreadsheet, summarizing the cost of upbringing maybe $1 million easily.
Right. Here's your bill.
Exactly. And say, okay, now start working to pay this back.
That would be absurd. It'd be completely unethical, too.
Totally absurd. The infant's only response, as the source describes it, is just simple faith and dependency. That's it.
They cry when they're hungry.
They cry when they're hungry. They trust the person holding them.
Mm-hmm.
Their response is entirely based on depending on someone else, not contributing anything themselves.
They can't possibly perform good works or pay the parent back for providing everything.
No way. And this is the exact parallel the sources draw for salvation. When we receive grace through Jesus, it requires no good works from us, no payment. Why? Because humanity could never meet the infinite standard required.
Right.
It only requires faith in the giver. Simple trust. Therefore, when we begin to offer back to God, it is emphatically not a transaction. It's not to earn favor. It's not to secure salvation. It's definitely not to pay down some kind of spiritual debt.
So what is it then?
It's an overflow. An overflow of gratitude for a love, a gift we received completely for free.
Okay, that philosophical shift really makes offering sound more like an expression of worship rather than just an obligation.
That's exactly it.
If you're trying to earn something by giving, you're just fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of the relationship described here, which is already characterized by unconditional giving from the divine side.
Yeah. And, if offering makes you feel stressed or burdened, the sources suggest it's actually a symptom. It means that the acceptance of God's unconditional love and his ultimate ownership, it hasn't fully settled in your heart yet.
You're trying to fit a grace-based response into a debt-based mindset.
Exactly. The two just don't mix.
Okay, that clarity on motivation is really critical. But if offering is truly a response to God, then we have to ask maybe the administrative question, the one that causes a lot of confusion. Where does the money actually go? I think most people assume, when they give an offering, they're simply donating to the church as an institution.
Right. And that assumption, understandable as it is where the confusion often lies. Because it kind of obscures the true recipient.
How so?
Well, the sources clarify this distinction really beautifully, actually, using an ancient mandate found way back in the book of Numbers, chapter 18, verse 24.
Okay, Numbers 18.24. Let's drill down on that. What does that historical context reveal about the flow of the offering?
Okay, so Numbers 18.24 states that the tithe, which back then was typically a tenth of the produce or livestock it was offered to the Lord, as a heave offering.
A heave offering.
Yeah, like lifted up, dedicated specifically to God. But then the passage continues. It says, God then gave this tithe to the Levites as their inheritance, their property.
So it establishes this kind of divine administrative chain. God receives it first, then allocates it.
Precisely.
But wait, why was that necessary? Why did God need to act as the middleman? Why didn't the other tribes just pay the Levites directly for their services?
Good question. It connects directly to the Levites' really unique political and social standing within Israel at that time.
Okay.
When the land of Canaan was divided up among the 12 tribes, the tribe of Levi was explicitly excluded. They didn't receive a portion of the property like the others.
Right, I remember that.
Their inheritance, their livelihood, was designated as the service of the tabernacle and later the temple and the Lord himself. They were essentially the full-time clergy, the ministers, serving the spiritual needs of the entire nation.
So since they weren't farming or raising livestock or maintaining big tracts of land like the other tribes, they had no independent means of self-sustainment.
Exactly right. The tithes, the offerings, were God's divinely instituted mechanism to make sure that the people who dedicated their entire lives to the spiritual health of the community were financially supported.
They couldn't really work a secular job.
No, they had a sacred trust, a full-time calling. The offerings ensure that the central work of the kingdom, the worship, the teaching, maintaining the religious life of the nation, was actually sustained.
Okay, so translating that forward, The offering is dedicated to God first as an act of worship and gratitude, and then God immediately directs those resources to support the work of his kingdom.
Yes.
Which today, that would translate into things like sustaining modern church ministry, running mission work, spreading the gospel, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the implication here is really crucial for you, the listener. Your offering, according to this model, is directed to the divine giver first.
Okay.
The church, or the ministry, is merely the mechanism, the conduit, through which God chooses to execute his work on earth.
Wow. That changes things. When you shift your perception from, say, I am funding the building renovation to I am worshiping the Creator, and he is choosing to use my gift to renovate the building.
See, the spiritual significance just dramatically increases, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And that realization, it must shift the accountability as well. The giver is accountable to God for the act of giving.
Mm-hmm.
And the church, or the institution, is then accountable to God for the responsible use of those resources that were dedicated to him.
It certainly does. Both sides have a responsibility in that chain. And, this clarity also sheds light on who should really be participating in this specific act of dedication.
How so?
Well, if offering is fundamentally a response to God's grace and a
Mhm.
recognition of his ownership based on salvation, how does that differentiate it from just general philanthropy? Or, say, donations from people who aren't believers?
Right. Is a donation from someone who doesn't follow this particular faith structure, is it still a good thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, general charity, philanthropy, those are wonderful and incredibly necessary in society. We need more of it.
Yeah.
But the sources draw a clear theological line regarding the specific concept of offering within this framework. Offering, in this specific context, is primarily intended for believers.
Okay.
For those who recognize God's ownership and grace through salvation, a non-believer, well, they might donate out of impulse or social obligation or just general human goodness, which is great.
Yeah.
But they fundamentally lack the foundational understanding required for this specific definition of offering. They don't grasp the dedication aspect, the response to God's prior love. Essentially, they are giving their money, not dedicating God's resources back to him as an act of worship.
Got it. So without that prior acceptance of divine ownership and grace, the action is just a financial donation, however generous. It's not technically an act of worship in the way these sources define offering.
Right, the motivation, the underlying belief system actually changes the definition of the act itself within this theological context.
You have to recognize the giver before you can truly dedicate the gift back as an act of worship.
You got it. And this just reinforces that giving, in this specific context, is really an inside-out spiritual discipline. It starts inside.
Okay, so moving into section 3 then. We address the aspect that, according to these sources, dictates whether the gift is even accepted by God, and that is the attitude of the heart.
Yes, this is huge.
Once we've sort of settled who we're giving to God and why, gratitude, the question becomes how we give. And here the sources seem absolutely unanimous. The quantity, the dollar amount, means basically nothing compared to the internal character, the attitude.
It really is the ultimate spiritual quality check, isn't it? The teaching is crystal clear. God judges the heart, the attitude, not the outward amount, not the visible show of generosity.
So you could give a sum that looks massive to everyone else.
Huge. But if your heart is burdened or resentful or doing it grudgingly, that offering, according to these sources, is actually rejected. It doesn't count, spiritually speaking.
Wow, so the principle of willingness, then, is paramount. Giving must be done willingly, cheerfully, not grudgingly, not by compulsion.
And this is where we absolutely have to dive into that key scripture, 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. It really is the cornerstone for this point.
Okay, what does it say?
Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver.
A cheerful giver. We hear that phrase a lot.
We do. But this is where the depth of the original text is so revealing, according to the sources we looked at.
Okay. What did the original Greek imply about what a cheerful giver actually looked like?
It's way more than just putting on a polite smile as the plate goes by. The sources detail the original language, hilaros, where we get the word hilarious.
Really?
Yeah. It implies someone so happy, so filled with genuine joy in the act of giving, that they literally want to smile or laugh out loud or just beam with delight in the act itself.
Wow, okay. So not just content, but like ecstatic joy.
Yes. Think about the joy you feel when you give the perfect Christmas gift to someone you really love and you watch their face light up. That unadulterated happiness in the giving itself, That's the standard described here.
Okay, that is an incredibly high standard if we're approaching the offering plate feeling stressed or anxious about parting with the money.
Exactly.
It reveals that any internal reluctance, that feeling of resistance or struggle or, ooh, do I have to? That's immediately a failing grade, isn't it? Regardless of the cash value.
That's precisely it.
Hmm.
And that internal wrestling, that's exactly what the sources define as the key obstacle. That feeling of dread or that sense of internal negotiation when the time comes to give. That struggle means your heart just isn't yet completely comfortable, completely at peace with the idea of dedicating that resource back to its true owner.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to the source shares here, the $50 bill lesson. It captures that internal conflict perfectly. You know, you anticipate the offering coming around, and you're kind of hoping you have some small change, maybe a 5 or a 10, something you can just toss in without really thinking about it, almost painlessly.
Right. Minimum friction.
But then you reach into your pocket or purse, and you realize all you have is a large denomination bill, maybe a 50, maybe 100.
And boom, that immediate internal conflict just hits you like a physical wall. Your brain starts running calculations. Oh man, I was going to use this for groceries later. Ugh, I know I committed to contributing, but gosh, this is way more than I wanted to part with right now.
And the source points out, even if you do reluctantly place that large bill in the plate,
Yeah.
that internal resistance, that feeling of being forced or grudging, it means that the offering, despite its maybe impressive size, was tainted. It was spoiled by the poor, unwilling attitude. You gave the money, sure, but you actually lost the joy and the spiritual benefit of the act itself.
Now, that analysis just cuts right through our self-deception, doesn't it? We so often judge our own generosity, or maybe others, by the dollar amount. We seek external approval, or we try to justify ourselves based on the number.
Yeah.
But if the act of giving causes you that internal agony, that wrestling match inside, the sources say that is definitive evidence that your heart is not yet fully aligned with the principle of God's ownership and the joy of participating with Him. The act, therefore, is spiritually deficient.
Okay. And since offering is described here not just as, a financial transaction, but as a physical act of reverence, like that heave offering you mentioned, a memorial gift,
Yeah, lifting it up.
it really needs to be treated as an integral part of congregational worship. Just like singing, just like praying, it's an act of faith expressed physically.
Absolutely. And to help cultivate this necessary attitude, the sources bring up a really practical strategy. It's found in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2, preparedness.
Preparedness, how does that help?
The teaching there is to set aside funds proportionally based on your income before you even come to the gathering. Decide ahead of time.
So setting aside the money beforehand seems like the practical antidote to that last-minute emotional dread.
Exactly.
If the money is already mentally, maybe even physically designated for offering, it's no longer my money that I'm painfully losing in that moment. It's the Lord's resource that I'm now just faithfully, maybe even joyfully dedicating as planned.
It makes the act intentional rather than impulsive or reluctant. It transforms the moment the offering plate comes by from potentially a point of anxiety into a point of worship.
Right.
It becomes less about the cash transfer itself and more about the joyful confirmation of the decision you already made back home in facing gratitude.
This intense focus on the internal attitude, on the heart, leads us directly into Section 4. And this deals with, well, the extreme and really dangerous hypocrisy of maintaining perfect outward religious performance while neglecting core character.
Yeah, this is where it gets really challenging. This is the classic cautionary tale of the Pharisees.
Right.
They remain, even today, kind of the benchmark for external religious perfection. Yet, they were the target of Jesus' absolute strongest rebukes in the Gospels. Why? Well, the sources say they performed the best tithing imaginable. Technically perfect.
Meticulously precise, wasn't it? The sources mentioned they calculated 10% of everything, even down to tiny culinary spices like mint, anise, and cumin.
Can you imagine counting out spice seeds? They had perfect technical compliance with the letter of the law, mathematically flawless in their giving.
Okay, but this creates that profound paradox then. If they followed the law perfectly to the tiniest detail, why on earth was Jesus so displeased with them?
Because, as Jesus pointed out, their hearts lacked the truly essential character qualities. They meticulously focused on the visible transaction, the 10% of spices, while completely neglecting three invisible but absolutely foundational requirements of God's broader law.
And those were?
Justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
Okay, let's unpack those three quickly. What do they mean here?
Okay, so justice here refers to equity. Fair dealing.
Mm,
How they treated other people in business, in society. Were they fair? Were they upright?
right.
Mercy is about compassion, active help and care for the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable in society.
Mm,
Did they actually care about people suffering?
okay.
And faithfulness, or faith, means trustworthiness, integrity, being reliable, being honest in all their dealings, keeping their word. Basically, could you trust them?
So the problem was they could be highly religious inside the temple with their money,
Meticulous.
but utterly ruthless or maybe just uncompassionate and untrustworthy outside the temple walls in their daily lives.
Exactly. They were laser focused on the quantifiable tithe, the 10% they could measure and show off. But they completely ignored the foundational relational stewardship of how they used their character, how they treated people.
Which you can't easily measure.
No. Those three qualities, justice, mercy, faithfulness, they're matters of internal character. They're invisible to the public eye, usually, but they are intimately known to the divine.
Right.
The Pharisees maintained this righteous, shining exterior for everyone to see, but Jesus described them as being rotten inside, like whitewashed tombs, beautiful outside, dead inside. This is the ultimate danger highlighted here. External piety used as a mask, a cover for internal deficiency.
So this really highlights that true stewardship, the kind these sources advocate, demands an inside-out consistency. What you do with your money, your offering, it has to flow from a character that is already committed to righteous dealing, to compassion, to integrity.
Yes, you can't, according to this view, pay God 10% while actively cheating your neighbor out of 90% and think everything's okay.
That holistic view is key then. It's not just about the offering moment.
No, it's about the whole life reflecting that dedication. And the sources reinforce this with another really powerful anecdote. It illustrates the danger of confusing our own human capability, or maybe our pride, with divine authority, especially in the realm of provision and giving.
Ah, this must be the story about the host, one serving as church treasurer.
That's the one.
Okay, let's set the scene for this 50-cent slap story, as the source calls it. So, the treasurer is looking at the running total for some big fundraising goal, maybe $2,000 for a mission project or something.
Right.
And they're worried, they're anxious that the congregation isn't going to reach the target.
Yep, common feeling for a treasurer, I imagine. And in that moment of very human anxiety and concern, the host had a thought. It was brief, apparently only lasted about 5 seconds, but highly significant.
And the thought was,
The thought was, okay, if the congregation falls short, I'll just cover the remainder myself.
which on the surface sounds responsible,
Yeah.
right? Proactive, even noble. I'll make sure we get there.
Seems like it. But the sources identify this thought, even though it only lasted 5 seconds, as an act of profound pride, and actually a lack of faith in the congregation's willingness and ability to participate.
Wow. Why was that thought, which intended to solve a potential problem, deemed prideful?
Because it subtly put the treasurer's own ego and financial capability above God's authority and the collective body's role. The thought implied, even if unconsciously, I am more responsible than the rest of this congregation, or maybe I am capable of compensating for their perceived failings or lack of generosity.
Yeah.
It's a very subtle shift from being a faithful administrator of what others give to becoming a prideful intervener who thinks they need to fix things or make up the difference. It assumes human effort, or in this case, the treasurer's personal wealth, not divine providence working through the community, is the key to achieving the goal.
Okay, so what happened then when the final offering was actually collected and counted?
Well, the count came in.
Yeah.
And excluding the host's own planned donation, the total revealed that the congregation had actually exceeded the $2,000 target
Oh, by how much?
by exactly $50.
50 cents. No, $50.
Sorry, $50 over the
Yeah.
goal. And the source calls this the $50 slap. Maybe not 50 cents, but still a slap. A small but definitive lesson. It was as if God used that small, seemingly insignificant excess amount to teach the treasurer a profound truth. It is God's authority that governs provision. It's his work. The treasurer wasn't there to judge the generosity of the community or to fill perceived gaps out of their own pride or anxiety.
They were just there to administer the dedication of others.
Exactly. Faithfully count it, manage it responsibly. That's it.
Wow. That is a powerful moment of correction. It really drives home that we cannot judge other people's giving. We certainly can't try to compensate for it based on our own assessment. And we definitely cannot attempt to help God meet his targets through our human anxiety or worse, our arrogance.
Absolutely not. Giving is presented here as a deeply private, relational matter between each individual and the divine. And, this realization just hammers home that our relationship with money, how we view it, how we use it, how we give it, it really is a spiritual acid test, isn't it?
Yeah.
It instantly reveals whether we're operating from a foundation of pride and scarcity, I need to control this, I need to fix this, or from a place of genuine trust and acknowledgement of God's ultimate ownership and his ability to provide.
Okay, so we've established that offering, in this view, must be a grateful response, flowing from a cheerful heart and connected to an overall integrity of character. Now, let's shift our perspective a bit, look towards the future implications. What about the promise of blessing and this idea of eternal value?
Right, because while we absolutely must keep remembering that giving is not a transactional exchange, we don't deposit $100 expecting a guaranteed $200 back.
Not an investment scheme.
Definitely not. The sources do clearly confirm that giving, done with the right heart, is undeniably a pathway to blessing. And this leads us straight to that well-known, yet often misinterpreted, challenge in the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10.
Ah, yes, Malachi 3.7. This is the singular instance, isn't it, where God actually invites humanity to test me, which seems like a massive deviation from the general scriptural principle of not putting the Lord your God to the test.
It is a huge deviation. So what was the context? Why was such a challenge even given?
Yeah, what was going on there?
Well, the context in Malachi was one of profound covenant breaking. The people had essentially stopped honoring God with their tithes and offerings altogether.
They just stopped giving.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this had two catastrophic effects, according to the text. First, they were failing to support the Levites, the full-time ministers, so the temple worship system was collapsing. And second, by cutting themselves off from this act of worship and acknowledgement, they were spiritually starving themselves.
Yeah.
Their faith had withered, and they were actually complaining that serving God was pointless, that it brought no benefit.
Wow, okay, so God presents this challenge, test me, almost as a last-ditch effort to restore their trust and maybe rebuild that community structure that depended on the offerings.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. God essentially said through the prophet Malachi, look, you think this doesn't work. You think serving me is fruitless. Fine. Test me on this one specific point. Bring the whole tithe back into the storehouse. Fulfill your covenant responsibility. And then see if I will not throw open the windows of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it.
That promise of blessing, no room enough to store it. I mean, that sounds like total overwhelming abundance. But again, we have to apply that crucial distinction the sources keep emphasizing, right? These blessings are not guaranteed to be purely financial.
Absolutely critical distinction. If the only blessing you're looking for is a bigger bank account, you have fundamentally misunderstood the principle and reverted right back to that transactional, what's in it for me investment mindset.
Which negates the joy in the worship aspect.
Completely negates it. The blessings God promises here, the sources suggest, are often non-monetary. Things like spiritual maturity, maybe relational peace in your family, perhaps an abundance of time when you felt stretched thin, or a clarity of purpose you lacked before. They are blessings that often exceed what we can even imagine asking for, and they fill the deeper voids that earthly wealth simply can't touch.
Okay. This brings us then to what seems like the ultimate function of offering described in these texts. It somehow converts transient, vulnerable earthly resources into something with lasting, eternal value.
Yes, that's a key outcome. And the sources provide a really sharp contrast here by discussing the anxiety that earthly wealth inevitably seems to carry with it.
Right, that modern anecdote about the friend whose car was broken into while they were away on holiday, that was quite telling.
It really was. The friend assumed, naturally, oh, I must have forgotten to lock the door. Human error. But when they checked their home surveillance footage, it showed something far more disturbing. A criminal walked up, used some kind of advanced, apparently readily available electronic device.
Like something bought online.
Yeah, something to remotely bypass the car's sophisticated security system. The doors just unlocked. The thief slipped inside, took what they wanted, and left. No forced entry, no broken glass.
Wow, that's terrifying. It highlights the incredible ease with which our temporary possessions, no matter how securely we think we've locked them down.
Right. The best locks, the best alarms.
They're still unsafe, they're constantly threatened, and ultimately they lead to worry, to anxiety.
And that anxiety, that constant background hum of worry that you have to protect and defend what you own, that's presented as the psychological cost of pursuing and accumulating transient wealth. Offering, then, is positioned as the direct counter-movement to this anxiety. It's the act of intentionally converting temporary, vulnerable, earthly resources. Our money, yes, but also our time, our talents, into something with lasting, eternal value. Something tied directly to God's kingdom work, which the sources define as things like the salvation of souls, the building up of the church, the spread of the gospel, things that outlast us.
So we're essentially leveraging our relatively short lifespan, maybe 100, 120 years, if we're lucky, for purposes that will have impact long after we're gone, investing in forever.
That's the idea. And the sources bring this whole discussion full circle by looking at the one figure in history who arguably had the greatest success imaginable in earthly acquisition, King Solomon.
The richest man who ever lived.
The richest, probably the wisest in acquiring that wealth. Yet what was his final conclusion about life, as recorded in Ecclesiastes?
Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Meaningless, empty.
Exactly. He reached the absolute pinnacle of material success, intellectual achievement, power, pleasure, everything the world can offer. And yet he felt a profound spiritual emptiness at the end of it all.
His life becomes a sort of object lesson.
It really does. It demonstrates, maybe more clearly than any other, that no amount of massive material wealth can fill the emptiness or the void caused by separation from the divine creator, nor can it provide lasting meaning or purpose on its own.
So therefore, the core life goal for the faithful steward, according to these texts, is to operate with an eternal perspective.
Yes, always.
Choosing to invest in lasting, eternal purpose over the ultimately futile protection of transient, vulnerable, earthly assets that just cause anxiety anyway.
That sums it up perfectly. It's about shifting your investment strategy from the temporary to the eternal. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, that distinction between the anxiety of protecting temporary stuff and the peace that comes from investing in eternal value, that is a really powerful takeaway. To try and summarize this whole deep dive on the principles of offering, maybe we can consolidate our findings into, say, 4 core pillars for the listener to hold on to.
Yeah, that sounds good. 4 key takeaways. So first, the foundation. Giving is fundamentally a response. It's a grateful act of faith flowing from the unconditional salvation and grace we received first. It is not a transactional attempt to earn God's favor.
Right. Pillar 1, response. Okay.
Second, attitude is the non-negotiable metric. The correct attitude, willing, cheerful, even joyful, is absolutely paramount. God looks at the joy and willingness of the heart, not the size of the check.
Pillar 2, attitude. Got it.
Third, offering is an act of worship. It is dedicated directly to God first. He then uses those resources, often through the church or other ministries, to support his kingdom work. This keeps the focus divine, not merely institutional.
Okay, pillar 3, worship. And finally, the 4th pillar.
Here, finally, offering carries eternal value. It's a mechanism for converting perishable, temporary resources, our money, our time, our talents, into benefits and impact that last forever, which also helps eliminate the anxiety that comes of holding on to earthly possessions too tightly.
Pillar 4, eternal value. Response, attitude, worship, eternal value. That's a great summary.
And if the ultimate purpose of dedicating our resources is really, as the sources defined right at the beginning, part of dedicating our whole selves to God's authority, his work in the world,
Yeah.
then this naturally necessitates a lifestyle that's focused on more than just money. It has to be focused on service. We're called not only to give our material resources, but also to give ourselves our time, our energy, our care to others.
That makes sense. We learned that giving, fundamentally, is about shifting our focus away from I am most important and what can I get, towards others and the kingdom are important and how can I contribute or serve.
Exactly. So the provocative thought we'd like to leave you with, building on this idea of shifting focus and serving others, is this. If your offering your financial giving is meant to reflect the kind of character God desires, remember justice, mercy, and faithfulness from the Pharisees' discussion, then how does that same character change the way you interact with and actively serve the people closest to you, your family, your neighbors, your colleagues at work? Who, in your actual day-to-day life, is the recipient of your true character, reflecting that same spirit of generous, just, and merciful dedication?
That's definitely something to mull over. Who is my neighbor and how am I offering myself in service to them?
Yeah.
Plenty to think about until our next deep dive.